The following is a conversation with Adam Menges. Adam previously worked at Apple and SendGrid and founded Lobe AI, a company that was acquired by Microsoft that intended to make deep learning more accessible. Today, we discuss, among many other things, the role of visual programming languages, social fintech, that is something that Adam is thinking about, and his take on Bitcoin, NFTs, and cryptocurrencies. Stay with us if you want to learn more, not only about this, but also about how Adam approaches his day-to-day, works with various different teams at the same time, how he deals with creating ideas and turning them into startups, and a lot more. Hey, it's Nono, and this is the Getting Simple podcast. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that you can find a detailed list of episode notes at gettingsimple.com and that you can submit questions about this or any previous episodes at gettingsimple.com/ask. Without further ado, a conversation with Adam Menges. This is Adam's second time on the podcast. I already introduced you back then, but for those of you who don't know who Adam is, he's a passionate product designer, also an avid engineer and prototyper. And he previously worked at Apple and SendGrid. He also co-founded or founded a company called Lobe AI, which was really successful in gathering people's attention and even got acquired by Microsoft in 2018. Where it keeps being developed into a product that can actually help people train at the moment image classification models, hopefully in the future other types of models as well, and actually deploy them into mobile phones, into the cloud, and letting people who don't know anything about machine learning or AI train models with their own images and use them for real things. So yeah, and I expect today to get a sense of what Adam has been up to for the past 2 years that we haven't been. We've kept in touch pretty well for, being so far. And I just want to catch up and see what you've been up to. I know that some of that involves visual programming languages and probably a lot of other side projects. So yeah, what's up? How has it been?
Yeah, it's been great. I'm actually, I didn't do this on purpose, but I'm on my iPad. I'm kind of tempted. I might later share my screen. I can show you the touch visual programming thing that I've been working on. It's cool. It's coming together. Still a lot of work to do, but getting there. Just fun.
Cool. Yeah, I have actually, since we talked last time just about the idea of talking today, I asked on Twitter for the people who are there, and because on the sphere of computational designers in architecture and parametric design, a lot of people get introduced to programming through visual programming languages. For me, it was initially Grasshopper, and there was one back in the time called Generative Components that I think is the one that actually brought it into architectural design. So I got a list of names of programs. Some of them I didn't even know existed, and I have some here. So Quartz Composer, Spark AR, and Instagram filters, which you actually brought to my attention years ago. VVVV, which is an interface on Windows. Touch Designer, Facebook Origami, which I didn't know I was playing with last week. Grasshopper 3D, which is one of my favorites. DaVinci Resolve Fusion, Unreal Blueprints, Blender, Autodesk Dynamo, Max Jitter, and Node-RED. Some of them I have never used. I just took a look at what they are. Which of those call your attention the most? Which ones are you most comfortable with, or you think are more relevant?
Yeah, I'd actually be curious. So, you remember Kyle? We worked together.
Yeah, Kyle Steinfeld.
Yeah. So he's a huge fan of Grasshopper, and I saw some of the stuff he could do with 3D modeling and some the interactive stuff he could do. It was pretty cool, but I'm kind of curious. I don't actually know how have you used Grasshopper? Um, so let's see. I want to touch on that just because you mentioned it. And then I don't know, what do I use? A lot of origami, and then of course my own thing in building. A little bit with Blender lately. It's visual programming language. It looks very similar. It doesn't have any interaction pieces. It's mostly like shaders and such. And allows you to like mess around with the textures that you're applying to objects. So those three, I'd say, are the ones that I spend the most time in. I know some people really love, like Unity has one. Yeah, there's a few of them out there.
So you mentioned Blender, origami, and which one?
It's called Stitch, but it's my own.
Okay.
Yeah, secret one.
Okay. So yeah, maybe later we can, if you get there, we can see a bit of that. So yeah, for me, it all started in the architectural field, right? So I was creating architectural designs in 2D and 3D, so programs like Rhino, 3ds Max, and AutoCAD. And Grasshopper was the first program that I actually started actively using to make my design process a bit more productive, right? So in this environment, even though I've mentioned before generative components, which is the one that I actually got introduced to in a workshop, it was the first time that I could use programming for architecture, right? I had been learning programming on my own for website development and other things, but I had never tied together these two disciplines, right? I remember doing a bit of sort of visual scripting or scripting in Soft Image, which was also a 3D program. But in Grasshopper, I was mainly doing volumetric things like geometry, cubes and spheres and like lines and extruding things. So it was really visual, right? Like you mentioned last time, there's this duality between the graph view or the nodes that you move around, right? And the actual geometry space. And this doesn't always happen in this direct manner. For example, if you're doing shaders, the manifestation of the output that you're doing is the actual shader in the object. But here, there is almost always a direct mapping between some nodes, not all of them, but some nodes and a 3D object, right? So you get the sense that an object is creating something in the other kind of 3D world.
Yeah, okay. So what can you do with Grasshopper? So for instance, in Blender, you typically use nodes in one of two ways. So like one, you might be adjusting a texture in some way. So sending it through like a bunch of shaders. That, or you can use geometry nodes, which are a little bit newer, my knowledge at least. At the very least, they're being expanded a lot. They've got this like everything nodes project where they're trying to allow you to do everything that you would do through the interface through nodes. And so you can use geometry nodes to like programmatically make stuff. So like if you're trying to do something like a gravel beach, you can like make a few pieces of the gravel, and then you can use geometry nodes to start like spreading them out everywhere. Yeah, so that's at least what I've done. I'm sure there's like a ton more that I don't know that you can do in Blender. But like, what do you do in Grasshopper? Because there's even more. Like you can contact a endpoint. Like Kyle was doing that a bunch, where you'd like go contact some web service, use the response from that to do something inside of the 3D environment. It looked like pretty complex, pretty cool.
Yeah, so Grasshopper is a plugin inside of Rhinoceros, right? So Rhinoceros is an entire CAD modeling software that you can do 3D and 2D drawings. And it has a huge API built in for manipulating lines, geometry, 3D objects, and do operations, right? Like mathematical operations and geometric operations, like booleans or extrusions or fillets or, a lot of operations. So the first thing of Grasshopper is that you can use the Rhino API, right? Like all the commands, as you just said in Blender, you can use all of those commands in a visual programming way. So you have geometric operations as visual nodes. So if you create, for example, a geometry sphere, and then you create a cube, you could join them and say, okay, make a Boolean union or a Boolean difference or things like this, right? So you have mathematical operations that actually do geometric operations. But you also have a lot of core libraries in Grasshopper that are more abstract. So you have a math tab that has a lot of math nodes like add, like subtract, I don't know, like square root, a lot of things. You have as well. And now, I need a refresher because I don't remember a lot now, but you have another one that is just analytic for lines and curves, like intersections and like join and divide points, subdivide curves and things like this. Interpolate points and create like a curve or a spline. There are many of those. So Grasshopper has a ton of those. It has like analysis, and let's say that it has a series of tabs that would conform the core of it. But then later, you actually have the possibility of creating what's called, I think it's add-ins or plugins. I don't know. In Dynamo, they're called packages, but in Grasshopper, they're called, I think, plugins or add-ins or something like that, which means that the community is actually created plugins, most of them in C#, and you can download them, drag them into the plugins folder, and then they will show up as one more tab in your toolbar in Grasshopper. So that's the reason why Kyle, in that case, was making requests or was making machine learning stuff inside of it or things like that, because anyone who knows how to develop in C# can create their own plugin. They can give it to their friends or put it online, and then you can expand the functionality. So there's like third-party tools for structural optimization, for web requests, as you said, for like synchronizing objects on the cloud, for interoperability with other programs. There is a lot of stuff, and I'm probably forgetting a lot more, but Grasshopper itself has a lot of built-in things that you can, specific ways of previewing things on the 3D canvas. You can add text labels. I don't know. It's basically C# and Python as visual programming, and you can extend it. You can even do custom C# or Python nodes inside of the canvas. So you could code just basically open a text editor inside of one of your nodes and create a new functionality. So you can extend the functionality with third-party tools or your own custom code. Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's a scattered summary of what you can do because I haven't been using it for a few years seriously. But if you actually go to Jose Luis's channel, he spent like a year and a half building, or 2 years now, extensive advanced playlist on how to develop your own components in Grasshopper and how to do a ton of crazy stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's great that you can expand it. I think that's one problem you said you were playing around with programming last week. And by far the biggest problem is that you can't, at least for me, is that you can't extend it at all. It's kind of like all prepackaged. You can't make your own nodes. And it hurts because, you run up against the boundaries of what the tool can do. And I would love to be able to like extend it and kind of push it in one direction. But I can't. Like if you hit a boundary, then that's that. It's nice that Grasshopper offers that.
So do you have any idea if you've been working on this? Because I personally, one of the things that I have to say that I was a bit sad to see the first time I used Lobe is that I was quickly going and looking for that visual programming interface, right? Where I could, because for me, look how I kind of theorize. I was in the process of getting to learn more and more machine learning. And I saw a tool that was visual programming based and would have different sort of levels of granularity to create neural networks or to create machine learning workflows with visual programming would be a tool that would allow me to access easier in an easier way machine learning complex concepts, right? Like convolutions or classification or operations that you do inside of a neural network, like the different layers that you have. Maybe if you have them as nodes, you will be able to build those. So that was one of the things that I missed when I went into Lobe. So what do you think is the role of visual programming in general? So you've been experimenting with it for a long time now.
Yeah. I think speaking of Lobe, the team still has on their, like, as far as I know, on their roadmap, sort of off in the far distance. Who knows if it'll ever happen, like bringing back some of those ideas. But I mean, the biggest thing we learned is that people just want to get something done with machine learning. And it turns out that if you give them like a nice pre-trained model and maybe some hyperparameter optimization on top of that, I can get them pretty close. You don't actually need to go in and start modifying the model. And then that's just one whole like collection of things that you would need to learn to get started that you just don't need to do if it just does it for you. And so that was a big learning, which, if you come to that conclusion, that you don't really need an interface for modifying a model anymore. So you can throw that out the window. So that's the reason it disappeared. But that's not necessarily true in other areas, right? Where modifying the thing to do something else is actually a really interesting and productive thing to do. This is what people want to do in machine learning often is using a concept, a model that someone else has already built to do image classification or image segmentation or whatever they want to do. They have like a job they want to do and they want to apply their own data to it. And that's the modification they want to do, not necessarily like modifying the model itself.
Yeah, no, and I think that touches on an interesting topic to what I was asking. That is, your kind of headline was that you wanted to have a deep learning application for everyone, right? So it would be really accessible. And I think visual programming is more accessible than regular programming, but still it has a learning curve, right? So it's definitely a right choice to go easy UI first, right? Let's say, instead of the visual programming. But I like how, for example, inside of a Spark AI, so Spark AR or Origami, you can open that visual programming environment and then have a more intricate way of creating connections between the different elements in your application.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So how do you think, have you had any thoughts or have you done any research on where visual programming started?
As far as I know, like HyperCard is usually the thing. Whenever I try to go down the like history of VPL or computing in general, HyperCard usually is one of the start points that I end on. Actually, I don't know if you saw this in news the other day, but there was someone had recreated HyperCard in the browser. So I think they just remade it in JavaScript or something like that. And apparently you could even import some of your old packages. So I don't know how many people have like old HyperCard files lying around, but apparently you could try to import it and it would work. And some people in the like comment section on Hyper Games were able to find the like old HyperCard stuff and where they used it again. So that's pretty cool. And it's kind of fun. Like every time you bring up HyperCard, there's always this like small group of people in the room who's like, who grew up on it and admire it and reminisce about the days when a kid, they can make an app and they can do it within a day. They can make something really simple to solve a little task. And they feel like something like that is missing in their current life.
What is your motivation to develop programming languages?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's twofold. So one is I was really inspired by a friend who made their own programming language. And they actually haven't published it. They haven't done anything with it. It's like their own sort of environment where they can be idiosyncratic and move really quickly because it's a language built for them. And they build all the prototypes and they've made some other big ones that I've heard of. But it all started with a prototype they were able to build in their own language because they can move really quickly. And also just like sitting down with them and seeing like how fast they can move. So that part is one. And then the second part is I've seen how accessible it can make computing. And if you take people like maybe Andreessen's quote about there'll be like two people in the future, those who tell computers what to do and those who are told by computers what to do. If you take that literally, then making it more accessible to tell computers what to do to make interactive, interesting things, even if it's just a gateway drug to like other forms of programming, seems important, right? And I've seen how much more accessible it is to jump right in. So for instance, I'm teaching my sister some like basic programming concepts. And we started off in JavaScript. It's like, why not? kind of easy. It's fairly forgiving language. And yeah, and it took a bit of time to try to understand like for loop, if statement, all these curly braces everywhere. If you're used to something like that, it can be hard to remember how daunting it is when you first look at it. And it was quite daunting. I was almost surprised how daunting it was. But then if you show her something like origami, or QC, or one of the others out there, like the speed at which she was able to learn and build something, she was proud of the little thing that she built, was exponentially quicker, right? Like it's the difference of at the end of the day having something that you can show that you can play with and interact with versus like at the end of the week maybe having something printing out to the terminal that kind of shows you did something. Like it's an order of magnitude faster and more accessible. Yeah.
When you were explaining this with your sister, for example, you mentioned your sister, right? You're trying to teach her. Who would be the objective user, right? In general, would that be somebody who's never coded, who wants to learn how to code, or as you said before, because I want to come back more in the general terms, right? You mentioned before in Lobe AI, we didn't end up releasing initially visual programming because it was easier to have another interface just to get the job done and then go. Is that going to be the purpose for people who don't have maybe the time or the willingness or the necessity to learn how to code, that a visual programming environment would allow them to maybe change slightly the behavior of a machine without having to dive deeper?
Yeah, I think there's like two tracks, at least as far as I can tell, where, my thing specifically, I think will be oriented towards product designers and people who want to build like prototypes really quickly. But at the same time, there could be other projects, or maybe they could use this project to kind of get introduced. Or there would be a completely different project that's oriented towards kids or someone else that's trying to learn. I don't think you need to like roll it all into one product. Like there can be several forms of visual programming languages that orient towards different users, right? Like for instance, have you played around with either Facebook Horizons or PlayStation Dreams or any of the other ones yet? Rec Room. Yeah,
Wait, can you mention that again? I don't know which.
Oh yeah, Facebook Horizons.
Facebook Horizons. I've seen, but I haven't played with.
Okay, yeah. So there's that. There's Dreams, which is a PlayStation. Like it's a game to make a game, basically. And there are a few others out there. And so they offer like visual programming languages for creating 3D content for like the metaverse, right? Like being able to offer something really simple so that regular, or at least somewhat regular, average people can create something and put it out there into the metaverse. And let's see, Dreams is doing it in like a node-based way. So there's nodes and edges. It looks exactly like you see. And then Facebook Horizons is using more of a like that MIT like sketch. Basically a block. Like if you have an if statement, you kind of have a block, and then you have something inside of that block that happens if the condition is true. Yeah. I think both of those are oriented towards like being an easier way for regular people to program so that they can do something, with their controller on the screen inside of a VR space and put together some like simple little interactions.
So I wanted to know what in the AI for creatives space, right? What, if anything, are there any technologies that are exciting to you that you've been keeping an eye on?
Nothing over the past few years. I think Lobe and Google has a one project oriented towards music. Let's see if I can find it. What is it, like Magellan?
Magenta,
that's it. Yeah, that one seems pretty cool. It's been years at this point, but I played around with it a bit. There'll probably be more stuff in the future. There just seems to be like a little bit of a lull in interesting AI stuff.
And how do you see, you mentioned before that some people would be telling machines what to do and other people would be told what to do by machines.
Right.
What do you think the role of the people who are told what to do by machines is, right? When the machine outperforms almost everyone, I'm thinking of like maybe doctors, biologists, or like even highly specialized people.
So like what someone who's told what to do by a computer, what would they be doing? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there might be a spectrum, right? Like there could be people working at McDonald's, sort of just like, all right, fry the hamburger now, do the next thing, like sort of an extension of the program. Like they're an extension of the program. And maybe in more like advanced ways, you just mentioned a doctor. I mean, that's one area that seems kind of exciting, right? Like if you can have AI help doctors make diagnoses, like if the algorithm's trained on the predictions of some of the best doctors in the world, and then you're able to give that to everyone. That seems like everyone's quality health go much higher. Like for a lot of diseases, early detection's key, right? And so if you can have, if there are some doctors out there that are much better at early detection, they can look at an X-ray, they can look at a scan, they can look at whatever data, they can notice stuff. They've got like a better pattern recognition going on. If you can democratize that and spread that that knowledge out to more people, that sounds good for everyone, right? And maybe that's an instance of them being told what to do by a machine, but maybe it feels less bad than or less degrading, I guess.
So you are, instead of trying to see the spectrum of polarization as, you either do or are told what to do, you're looking at this in-between step where you would have a hybrid role, right? Of like the machine collaborating with the expert and maybe offloading some parts of their daily task, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder what other fields. I mean, I guess this will happen in every field. I can imagine one of the things that I try to see what will happen as well is in design, right? We keep seeing many new things being released there.
Yeah. Have you seen Jordan Singer's? It is a little like designer Figma plugin. It's pretty cool. It uses GPT-3 and basically makes a map in between a paragraph about a design and an artboard. And I mean, at least in the like choice examples that he showed, it worked pretty well. Like you could describe Instagram basically like give a area full of square pictures, and below that have hearts and a context menu, and there would be a feed of this stuff with a tab bar down at the bottom with 5 different tabs. And it would pop out an artboard that like looks an awful lot like Instagram. Like it's with individual layers in each icon and everything in general. Yeah, it's kind of cool, right? Like stuff like that's sort of exciting, especially if it can make some of the like humdrum work of designing much easier. If it can quickly get you to a starting point that otherwise would have taken you maybe like 10 minutes to build that little artboard, and you can just write out a sentence and I'll give it to you. There's also on the coding side, like have you played around with GitHub's, what are they calling it? AI Copilot, GitHub Copilot thing?
No, I haven't tried it yet, but I've seen what it is. What about you?
Yeah. I'm on the beta, and it's pretty impressive, to be honest. So like I don't do much programming day to day anymore, but maybe when was this? Maybe like August last year, I pulled it up and started playing around just to like, okay, let me see what this is all about. And I wanted to create a React app that had a square in the center of the screen, and when you like click and drag on the square, you move it around, right? Like a really simple app. And it was pretty impressive. Like you could you would define the like component and define it as rectangle, you define the render, and then you would want each one of the event handlers. So like when you click on the on mouse down, on the rectangle, on mouse up, on mouse move. And based on the name, like draggable box was the name of the component. And I start typing on mouse down. It filled out the entire like on mouse down, on mouse up, and on mouse move event handlers with exactly what you'd want. It even suggested state up at the top for like the X and Y position, like things that you would need to store for the box. Like I wound up really only typing the draggable box component name, maybe a few things in the render function, like a 100 by 100 width and height. So like I had to type out some, but it was surprising how much it was able to like guess and fill out. And it's like humdrum stuff where it's like I don't really want to like have to write this, this event handler for the 20th time. Like it was useful just to have the machine type it in. And apparently, if you read their blog posts, it's gotten even better than what's in the public release. So I mean, stuff like that's sort of like both exciting and scary at the same time.
Why do you think it's scary?
I think it's scary for some people, just jobs, right? It's like classic. But if it keeps getting better, what's to say a PM sort of can't write like a long description of the app that they want built, and instead of handing it out to an engineer, they hand it to a program and it pops out something that looks quite close to what they described.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder for me what it would mean. I always keep thinking that even if the machine is doing more for you, you would just get more done. I don't know, like it's not that much that you necessarily get rid of the developers. Maybe you ask more from them, right? Like now that you know that they can build all these React components really, really fast because it's automated, then you expect the prototype to be ready in 1 or 2 days instead of 2 months, right?
Yeah,
But I'm not sure. That's a question that I don't have an answer to. I think if we work less, I mean, definitely jobs are gonna go, but hopefully others will come or other roles get invented for the people who don't need to do those jobs anymore. But at least on my own personal opinion, like when I automate things, I don't end up going to the beach for 2 days a week. I end up just doing more stuff and kind of getting busy again. So let me ask you, you've said before that you don't code a lot anymore, right? Like that you don't do daily coding. We haven't really mentioned that you are not with Lobe anymore, right? So there was a point where you kind of moved on from working with them, and then you started working on your own projects.
Yep.
And since then, you've gone to kind of work on other new projects, right? Which are kind of secret, or I don't know how secret they are, right? But before we talk about any of that, or as much as you want to mention, how does it feel, right? First you were on a startup, then you got acquired, and then you're back at being on your own and making your own decisions. If you don't code, what do you do, and how does it feel to be in that situation?
Yeah, feels good. I mean, mostly it's just like something new for my brain to learn. I've been involved in a couple projects. So there's one actually sold to Niantic recently, and it's it's not out there anymore. But basically, we developed ways for during 2020 and 2021. Everyone's spending a lot more time inside, and we developed a few ways for people to like game together and to create memories together as they're gaming. I'm trying to think of like what's a good example. Like one thing that we were working towards was let's say, do you do much PC gaming? I honestly don't either, but but I can understand the plight. Like I can have sympathy for it. And if you're hanging out with a bunch of your friends and you're gaming together, specifically on your PC, then we thought it'd be kind of nice if we had a like proverbial camera in the room. Like when something funny happens, the ability to take a picture. And so we made one of the features of the app. It never made it to like public release, but we were getting pretty close. Was if you're all sitting around, you're all remote, and you're gaming together, and something funny happens. Anyone then can press F9, and it'll record everyone's screen and everyone's camera for the last 30 seconds. So it's been buffering 30-second window. And it can create, like, in theory, these like pretty interesting moments where like something funny happens, you snap a picture and you grab not only like your own screen where maybe something funny happened to you, but maybe someone else like caused that funny thing. So you can like look at their perspective as that thing happened in the game, and you can see everyone's facial expression as something happens. Like there was one feature that we were putting out. The other features that we did place out there were just like basic screen recording tools, and a bunch of other ways for like people to create content based on the games that they were playing, and then share that across their Discord and mobile friends. So that's one project where I spent a lot of time thinking about like the problems that PC gamers and people that are playing like League of Legends or Valorant, some of these other games, like I hadn't honestly played any of them before. And so it was quite interesting to dive into their world and create solutions for them. And of course, to create like beautiful UI on both the mobile app and desktop app that they enjoyed using. And so we were able to build something that a couple 100,000 people were using. They caught the notice of Niantic, which does the like Pokemon Go company. Yeah. It's pretty cool. They have office space at the like top level of the Ferry building here in SF. And they're a great company. Like I'm kind of surprised how delightful they are. They want to build some of these like social experiences, but do them in a way that's very different than maybe Facebook or Twitter or TikTok. And it's not about the addiction, but it's like try to create fun games and fun social interactions that instead of like gluing people to the couch or to their desk or their phone, it encourages them to get outside and meet real people in the real world. Kind of like Pokemon Go. And it's been nice to think about like a whole other set of problems with them. But yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question of not like, what do you do day to day?
Before we go back into that, that function that you mentioned at the beginning, I think it's what the GoPro calls Hindsight, right? So you can be recording, I think, for 1 minute or 30 seconds before.
Yeah.
I have not used that yet, but I'm looking forward to. You can set it up for being there all the time, and then if something interesting happens, I don't know, like you're recording and there is like a race and somebody falls or something. If you click play at that time, you'll get the Hindsight, right? Like basically looking back sometime. My question was more directed to, you had a successful company and that got acquired. How did you decide the current projects that you're working on now? And, how do you feel the same way that this is going to be successful? I mean, I already see that this one got acquired by Niantic, but how do you choose your focus, or how do you make sure that what you're working on that you enjoy is actually going to get somewhere and it's just not going to be forgotten as a GitHub repo?
For one, I'm not necessarily aiming for like the same success as in the past, or like the same exact path. Like so long as I'm creating software that I think honestly makes the world a better place, even if it's just like a small little thing, that little like treat for the internet that I'm sticking out there, I'll be happy. And then like past that, I've thought a lot about software development and how do you create software and the team dynamics, because you usually need more than one person to create something interesting. And I think it's been enjoyable for me to take 8 or so years of learning and apply it to the next project, and learn a ton and apply it to the next project and learn a ton there. And just continue to get better and better at how do you have these, like, I find software teams to be incredibly interesting as organisms, right? Like you have, ideally, at least all the teams I've ever worked on are like a dozen, maybe max people, or right around there. Maybe that's the mean. And there's this, and they start off even smaller, like 3 or 4 people, and they're really interesting. Like how do you have these like 3 or 4 people to a dozen people work effectively together? What are their different roles, and how are they all helping this thing that they're trying to like birth together? It's a fascinating problem, and I enjoy those like small team dynamics, and and working on software. Like it's my craft and something that I thoroughly enjoy doing.
And going back to the non-coding, so what do you do now? So you used to code more before. How does it work now?
Yeah, let's see. So like I said, I think the biggest thing for me, I honestly enjoy code. I'm not, I can foresee doing much more of my like day-to-day being coding and again in the future. But right now, I mean, one way to separate it out is just like what apps do you use, right? So like maybe in the past it'd be like a lot of Vim or VS Code or something like that. Like that's the app I live in. Now the app I live in is probably split between Figma and Origami, 50-50-ish on each. So that's one way to look at it, is like what app do you spend the most time on? Another way to look at it is, are you focusing on like the macro or micro problems? I found when I was engineering, I was most focused on like the next week, right? Like there's some feature I want to put into the product. You have to be kind of like hyper focused on that. And so you're not really looking much more than like a week ahead. Or at least you can be, or at least I found that's how my brain was focused. And now I tend to think much more in the term of like months ahead, right? Like, okay, the team's moving forward at this pace. That means by the end of this month, we'll have like all of this done. And the end of 3 months, we'll have all of this done. Let's make sure the designs are done for the thing that we're going to build in 3 months. So like the time scale has changed. I think those two probably summarize the like biggest differences, like the apps that I spend time in, and also just the like mode of operation my mind's in.
Do you think now you can be more productive because you can focus on the macro scale and thinking more about what needs to be done and what you want to get done in a specific time than actually saying, okay, I want to get this done, and then you get lost into typing in VS Code for weeks?
Right. I don't think I'm more productive, just that I'm helping the team in a different way. It's a different type of productivity.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the fact that having a team allows you to develop things faster, right? Like,
yeah.
you can direct. What does the same team get involved in all the projects, or you're working with different teams for each project?
Yeah, different teams for each project. Yeah.
Also, I'm curious. You mentioned before about not thinking too much about the success of the current projects and just focusing on things that you enjoy. If it's not too much to ask, is that because also your first project, Lobe, was really successful and you don't need to worry that much about that at the moment?
I guess that helps, yeah. But it's also like a defense mechanism. Like I find, my wife calls it 5D chess. When Adam's playing 5D chess, like I find it's really easy for me to like think sort of like too far in advance. And it can be really helpful to not kind of get struck by analysis paralysis and instead be, how do I say this? Like, basically, if you allow yourself to like think too far out in advance and kind of your mind lives in the future a little bit too much, it can become paralyzing. People have like different mechanisms for trying to deal with this. And I think one useful tool that I found is just, trying to like just not pay attention to it. Like, I don't know what's going to happen with this thing that I'm doing, but so long as far as I can tell, it's a good thing and I enjoy working on it. And I'm not quite sure what'll happen when you put it out there into the world, but so long as it's good, that's basically as good as you can do. And if you try to like play 5D chess any more than that, it just gets stressful. So I think it's like also in part like a defense mechanism too, just to not get too caught up in it, just keep moving forward.
And can you comment a bit on your routines? I'm curious, like, what does your day-to-day look like now that you're not working at an office and that you have different teams that, we're post-COVID, where everyone got used to work at home and not go to an office?
Yeah, it's changed a little bit. Yeah, let's see. Last time we spoke, I was doing much more of a like crazy schedule. I don't know. I've gotten older. I've gotten more relaxed, and I also don't think my body can take that anymore. And so I've gotten into a like no alarms. At this point in my life, I'm trying I will never hear an alarm for the rest of my life mentality. We'll see if that winds up being true, but which means I usually wake up at like 7-ish. Like today was 7:30, for instance. But it changes day to day. And basically my thought is like, my body needs sleep. I'm just going to let it sleep. So no more alarms, which is actually kind of nice. I'm definitely happier. Let's see. What else do I do? I mean, I wake up and I try to do whatever it is I think I need to do that day. And like read a book to fall asleep. I still have some of the old habits. Like one of the first things I do, definitely not the first thing, but like after I get up and maybe after a workout, doing the like creating a note and then writing down the things that you want to get done that day. That's still a really useful exercise, but everything else can be pretty fluid and depends on the day.
Are you still using that metaphor of like keeping track of like the presence of death to stay in the moment, or is that you left a bit more that aside?
No, I definitely remind myself of that often.
I am also curious. You mentioned all these pointers to technologies and things, and I wonder, how do you catch up with so many things? Do you regularly also check like hacker news and media and things like this, or you have a system to kind of ingest or like absorb what's out there?
Yeah. Okay. So I built this is when did I build that? I think it was like exactly post college, or maybe I started working on it in college. I don't remember. But I have a script that that runs that it takes it grabs the top articles from Hacker News, from Reddit, from Designer News, from a couple other like RSS feeds of like people or media companies that I enjoy reading from. Takes all of those and then sends them through a SVM, because that's what I knew how to use at the time, like a machine learning algorithm to rank how much it thinks that I would enjoy reading this article. So it filters out, all the articles about like Java or something that I'm just not interested in. And then it also does some ranking based on like the popularity of the post and a few other heuristics. And then from there, it sticks it into, at one point, it stuck it into Pocket, and now it sticks it into Instapaper. It's become my main reader. But it's kind of nice because that way I don't need to go to all these websites to try to like read all this stuff. It can go there, it can try to determine, it does like a halfway decent job, like the things that I want to read, and then stick all of those in the Instapaper. And then I can read it all from one app that has, no ads and no clutter and just text on the screen. So that's been my method. It works relatively well. And then I also find like friends are like a great method of finding out the news. Basically, like if I have friends that are like addicted to the news, and they've got all these different sources, then if something interesting happens, they'll tell me, right? Like they can be that like filtering mechanism. They can spend all the time on it, and I just like reap the rewards.
Yeah, those are the notifications you cannot disable.
Yeah,
you say like sign out, like remove your alerts and stuff, but those will. Yeah, that's. I mean, I guess like there are some news that will get to you no matter what, right?
Yeah.
How long have you been using this system, this SVM?
Like I said, I can't quite remember if it was right after college or during college, but it's been going. Like, I mean, still using SVM. This is pre, at least me having any knowledge of neural network, like pre that.
This is smart vector machines, support vector machines.
Support vector machines. That's it. Yeah.
And is this open source?
No, it is not.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I wonder because this sounds like something that many people would use. It seems to me like an improved version of what was Google Reader, was it? I don't remember what it was.
Oh yeah, Google Reader was like an RSS reader thing, right?
Yeah, but that was like, it would just clatter with all of the things that were new from every site that you subscribe, and it was a bit of a mess. Cool. Yeah. And what about catching up with people? Like, I remember that when we met, you were really active into catching up and like being in touch with people. Are you slowing down with that? Are you still trying to make an effort in doing that?
Yeah, I'm trying to make an effort, but it's changed a lot. Like, okay, COVID really ransacked my plans after leaving Lobe. Like, on one hand, I wanted to spend, so like for one, I wanted to spend a year or two traveling around, but leaving in 2020 was just like not the right time to do that. So that was one way it ransacked my plans. The other way is that I find if you go to conferences or meetups, and especially if you have something to like show them on your laptop, you can like pull it out, give it to them. It leads to like really interesting conversations, but I also couldn't go to conferences or meetups. Yeah, so I've had to find like different avenues for both of those desires. Like on the travel front, I've been doing a lot more camping just around California, and seeing areas and places that I hadn't really seen before, that I can easily drive to. So that's nice. And then on the friend side, yeah, I think I've gotten into a place where like my meeting schedule is just dictated for me by like can Calendarly, is that how you pronounce it? The
Calendly?
automatic Calendly, yeah, that thing. And so I don't know. I go to meetings and I hop on Zooms just like this, but I am getting a little bored of it. Like I'm excited to go to coffee shops and meet up with real people again. I've been starting to do a little bit of that. Like this year, we're all vaccinated. I did a trip with some friends to Portland recently, or just west of Portland along the coast, and everyone like got tested the day before leaving, and everyone has been vaccinated. So I find that like if you hang out with groups that do something kind of like that, like they try to be relatively careful about it, you can start hanging out with people again. Because I also don't know, like it seems like this is basically as safe as it's going to get. Vaccines out, and if you're hanging out with people that are also trying to be safe, you're probably good.
Yes, I have that exact same feeling with Zoom and meetings online, because I feel everything has gotten homogenized in a way that at the beginning is good, but as you get more and more and more immersed into it, you get sick of it. I can say in my case, at least, I used to try to make all of these podcast interviews in person. Sometimes I would go to Boston in the US to meet my working team and colleagues physically. I would catch up with friends. I would travel more and I will see people. And all of those interactions actually remove the need to have certain meetings. So for example, I wouldn't have to be recording with you on Zoom.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have to meet with my colleagues so much on Zoom. I wouldn't catch up probably with friends that are in London via Zoom, which I do, or a WhatsApp call or something like that. So I really hate the fact that work stuff is good if you have to kind of fill in for a meeting on Zoom or if you're working with a remote team. But if every single interaction, I'm trying to say, it's really weird that catching up with a friend or even recording a podcast feels like you're having a work meeting, right? It's the same interface.
Yeah.
It's the same experience. It's the same way of scheduling it, or feeling like I'm tired of this meeting. I got to run to the next one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like it's, I actually like what you said about like it's scheduled the same. Like, I go to my calendar and like, at 11:30, I'm gonna start chatting. No. Versus if we were doing this in person, we'd be like texting each other, like, oh, hey, are you at the building yet? Or are you at the park yet? I'll be there in 5 minutes. Like everything's the exact same way that it works at work. And it's, I mean, I won't like bash it to the end of, like, Zoom is pretty good. FaceTime's pretty good. Like some of the remote tools have gotten much better than where they were at like 5 or 6 years ago. So that's kind of nice. So I don't know, they're not worthy of like ultimate bashing, but I definitely, like if you and I were doing this talk in person, maybe we'd go to a park and walk around, or maybe we'd be in a building together or something like that. And it would certainly be a lot more enjoyable than just like me staring at my iPad. Yeah.
I mean, you took me hiking last time, right? Like it was a different day, but we got to hang up. To hang out. And yeah, it's definitely not something that I look forward to maintaining, right? Like the fact that it's basically strategizing too much for social interactions that you should have more organically in some way.
Yeah, definitely.
And are there any other ways in which you think COVID has changed how you lived before?
Yeah. I don't know. It's sort of like so many ways. It's like, even like, how did I live life before? Right. Like it's sort of changed everything. I mean, I spend a lot more time inside, obviously. Yeah, I'm mostly encouraged lately. Like this is February 2022. Like late last year and early this year, I've noticed like my friend group in particular has become much more excited about getting out. Like everyone's starting to feel safe again. So I'm kind of on the up and up, right? Like most weekends are full of hikes with friends. Parks are all open around here. Cafes are pretty much open. And during COVID, people have built like all this outdoor space that wasn't there before to eat in. So like the cafes have sort of taken over the street or the sidewalk. And there's a lot more like outdoor space. So I don't know, things have really improved. But of course, everyone, I think you've gone through this too. Like it's COVID can be really hard, like harder on some than others. Mostly just like stuck inside stuff and not being able to see your friends. Like the way a friend put it was, you felt like COVID stopped all the fun stuff. Like it stopped the travel and it stopped seeing friends. But all the stuff that you needed to do continued, like working and paying bills. And that was assuming you were lucky enough to like keep your job and such too. But so like all the adult stuff, the like boring work stuff continued, but all the fun stuff ended. So I think like most of 2022 was probably like the worst of it, and it's just been getting better since then. So that's been nice.
I also wanted to ask you, what do you think of the crypto and the NFT and digital art space?
Yeah, I'm still developing my opinion. I don't know. I started off on like a very negative opinion. And I think it's still mostly negative. I think like part of it just comes down to what's the real use case, right? Like when I first, jumping back all the way to like 2015 or 14 or something. When I first bought Bitcoin and thought it was kind of cool, I mostly saw it as like, oh, you can use this to transfer around money, and in some cases avoid middlemen that are predatory. So this can be like people sending money back home to the family, and instead of going through like currency converter people that take a ridiculous percentage of the amount, you can send them Bitcoin and there's no middleman, and then they can sell the Bitcoin in their local currency. So I'm like, okay, cool. This seems like a way of like transferring funds in a decentralized way. That's kind of nifty. But it turns out that like that part isn't really used as much as the what's it called? Anticipating the price. There's a name for it, speculation.
Speculation.
So, speculation. Yeah. So I don't know. And that's like less interesting to me, especially because it's not really backed by anything real, right? Like when you're speculating about a company, you're speculating about how well they'll make their products and how high the demand will be, among other things. Like there's sort of something real backing the stock. But when you're sort of complaining or trying to speculate about Bitcoin or something else, there's nothing more than the supply and demand. And yeah, I don't know. I don't find that particularly attractive. I found the environmental damage, of course, is huge. And I've been waiting for what the next real use case is. So like, okay, transferring money around the world, maybe that was the first use case that I saw at least. The like currency speculation doesn't seem particularly interesting to me. NFTs are like one of the next use cases, but so far they're very like, you can buy something to use as your icon on Twitter. That doesn't seem particularly helpful to me. And so, okay, you've got like a database that's in theory decentralized. Although I don't know if you've seen Moxie's blog post. He did a really good job outlining. If you search Moxie blog post,
how do you spell it?
Moxie. He's the guy that created Signal, the messenger app, and yeah, he sort of outlines how maybe crypto isn't that decentralized in a really effective way. And also points out some of the problems with NFTs. He did this really cool experiment where he made an NFT. Do you know what an NFT is on the chain?
Yeah, I mean, a token, right? Like a unique token. Well, it can be a program. That's what you mean? Like
yeah, it's actually a URL. So an NFT is a URL on the blockchain. And he noticed that like, oh, okay, it's not actually a hash. That's what I thought it was when I started hearing about NFTs. I figured it was a hash of the like object that you're sharing. But it's not a hash. It's actually just a URL. And because of that, a URL is served up by a server, and that server can change the contents willy-nilly. And so he made this pretty cool NFT that was, he hosted the NFT on OpenSea and one of OpenSea's competitors, like two auction site things. And on OpenSea, he would notice on his server, because that's where the URL pointed to, if it was an OpenSea IP address. And then he would return one asset, like one picture. And then if it was on the competitor site, he would return another picture. And then if you loaded it from your own computer, like you weren't viewing it through OpenSea.com, but you were looking at it, you just loaded up the URL in your own browser. It would display the like shit emoji, because that's what you bought. But anyway, he pointed out that like, it's not as if you're buying a specific thing on the chain. Like it feels like you're buying like the ape or whoever. But you're actually not. You're buying, sort of buying a URL, but that URL can change what the content is at any point.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. So there is some sort of program that you create. It can point to an asset that in many platforms they host it in a different server, because that's the cheapest way to do when you mint it, right? Like you just mint that and point is basically the cheapest, and you point to where that asset is. There are other people who actually embed the media or the things on chain, I think, but that's like super expensive because you have to actually upload the thing and it's a lot more characters. What I've also seen is like there are some programs that would use the hash as the input for a program to generate different things. But again, normally the generative design program or generative art or something is outside of the chain, right? So it's again something you could change, and then it's basically you're buying a barcode or something, right? Like you're saying, but as if you could change what that barcode is pointing to, right? Because it's hosted in a different place.
Yeah, I saw the New York Times had created an article about a potentially useful case for crypto where they create, it's this company called Hive, and they create a router that uses a different spectrum, something that can be accessible something like 200 feet away. So they create a router that you connect to your home internet connection. And on the spectrum, it communicates with the other Hive routers in the area. And so it'll try to create this like mesh network. And then you can connect to this mesh network and transmit small amounts of data. So like Lime is using it for the Lime scooters to keep track of where they are. And the idea is that you can create like a much more cost-effective way than having like a cellular antenna inside of every single Lime scooter, right? And the way they had tried to do this before without crypto, and the company was about to fail. But they're succeeding now in part because they're rewarding people that host their own internet connection with some of their own coin. And the coin is done with a proof. Let's see, it's called proof of, it's like proof of something versus proof of work.
Proof of stake.
So it's a much more, thank you. Yes. And so it's much more energy efficient. It doesn't use more energy than like an LED light bulb, which is definitely a step in the right direction. And so it's kind of cool. Like that's a way of giving someone an asset in a cost-effective way that they might be able to then make money from, because they're providing a service. So I think there might be more use cases like this out there where like it's not just hosting URLs on blockchain, but maybe there's a different type of data that you can host on blockchain or different uses for coins. I think there might still be something there. Like I'm not completely angsty about the future of crypto and NFTs and whatever comes next, but I haven't seen a lot of like really honestly useful use cases yet.
In talking about investing, might be crypto or normal stock investing or other ETFs or any sort of investing, do you think people are putting their money in places that they don't know what they really mean?
Like all the retail investors that are using Robinhood and buying meme stocks and meme crypto. Is that what you're referring to? It'd be great if there was a way for people to be more conscious of what, instead of just investing in like 5 of their like meme stocks, they invested in 5 friends who then invested in 5 other things, and basically try to find a way to encourage people to be more diverse about the things that they're buying instead of simply sticking to Meta and Tesla and Bitcoin, Ethereum, and probably marking up their stock price or their price of Ethereum considerably, and to the point that like when there's a market correction, retail investors can get pretty burnt. And there's got to be a better way. And historically, anytime retail investors have gotten more involved in the stock market or other markets, you see this like ballooning effect because people don't totally understand what they're paying for, and they're willing to pay more. and then followed by a correction where a lot of people lost a lot of money. And some people probably have like too much money on the table right now. And so there might be, it'd be cool if there was a better way for retail investors to get involved in a way that still felt engaging. Like they aren't just sticking money into a mutual fund. Like that's boring. But that was still diversified and based on like sound financial incentives. Yeah. I think I mentioned last time, I must have, because you're bringing it up, that I've been thinking about problems like that. I don't really have anything to show for it yet. But it's been on my back burner, to say the least.
How would you call this?
What would I call this?
Yeah, not necessarily the application, but how would you call this type of investing?
Oh, social fintech is probably the tagline.
Yeah, so I mean, it's exciting because we don't all have time to track these things and know where they're going, right? So if you can appoint, I wonder also about the kind of second order chaos, right? Like if too many people are following the whales that are actually making all the money, maybe that will affect the market in ways they didn't expect of that wouldn't happen if they were not involved, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like to the point that some hedge funds, like they cap how much assets they'll have under management because they're trying not to, because it impedes the ability for them to move around and make bets. They have way too much under control, like assets under management. And it would be, especially if you have people who follow other people who follow other people, like you can have this like cascading effect that could be either like disastrous or done on purpose for something good. But yeah, it presents these like pretty interesting problems for sure.
Cool. To sort of wrap up, is there any advice for young people or people who are getting started with technology and design and all of these things that you're interested in?
Yeah. Okay. So I wonder if you'll enjoy this as an architect. I found a new book that is apparently pretty popular, and I'm just like late to the game here. But it's The Timeless Way of Building. Have you heard of this?
Nope.
No. Okay. The Timeless Way of Building. It's a delightful book about building and specifically architecture, but it's definitely applicable to basically anything that you would build. I've been telling people, and some people have mentioned like, oh yeah, I read that in like college, and it's influenced my life greatly. And somehow I'm just really late to the party, but it's a delightful book.
Can you elaborate a bit more?
Yeah. So the book is based in architecture, but again, I would argue that maybe especially if you're an architect, but even without, it winds up being a delightful book to read. So it talks about what makes something timeless, like why when you go to certain buildings or use certain products, they still feel modern. Like how did that happen? And you use other things and they feel very dated or let's see, I'm back. They feel really dated or like frivolous or odd, or maybe you use something that feels extremely modern, but you just know in 10 years then that will feel dated. It goes into like why. It's a very like philosophical book. Like why do some things feel timeless? Why do some things that are quite old when you use them now they feel delightful? And you can reference like different products, like different kettles. Like the kettle I'm using in my kitchen, is using a design from like the 1800s, but it feels extremely modern and delightful to use now. So like why is that the case? So it's a very like it's almost a philosophy book, but I'm enjoying it quite a bit, and it makes you think.
And lastly, can you tell us anything that you try to do daily to be a bit happier?
Yeah, go for a walk. Yeah, especially true during COVID, but get outside, go to your park, go for a walk.
Do you think you're disconnecting from technology or?
Yeah. Going on the walk, I won't bring my phone. I won't bring anything. Just leave it all at home and go.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Adam. I want to thank you for being with us today. Hopefully we can learn more about your project soon.
I would love to, like, maybe we could hop on a call, no, at some other point. I can show you, some of the like little projects, maybe some other thoughts I have on visual programming and this thing with Stitch. Be curious to get your input on it for sure.
Yeah, no, I'd love to use it. I mean, to give it a try and see how it goes. I'm also never dive into trying to develop a visual programming language myself. So do you have any pointers or where to start? Are there any repos that maybe say, oh yeah, fork this React application on GitHub and maybe start editing things and adding logic to it?
Oh man, I wish I looked for that exact thing. I can't find like a really good open source visual programming language that you could use to start as like a good starting point. You probably have to start from scratch, which is sort of unfortunate, but also it does leave the door open for you to do something like very different than what's been done before.
Okay. Do you want to point people before we end anywhere? Like any URL that they can see what you're doing, or Twitter or contact?
Probably my contact information. hello@adammenges.com. Yeah, shoot me an email if you want to talk.
Awesome. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Yeah, have a good night, Nona. Yeah.
Before you go, I'd like to remind you that you can find a detailed list of episode notes at gettingsimple.com, and that you can submit questions about this or any previous episodes at gettingsimple.com/ask. Thanks a lot for listening. We'll see you next time.